Chinese that circumvented all that through various methods and compromising different politicians to get it done. But the end result here is we're going to a currency that's backed by something, as opposed by a currency that's backed by nothing, albeit a negative nothing, which is debt. And that's why this is so important. And this is how the Federal Reserve has existed for the last 100 years. It's perpetual debt. And that all ends now.
So if we look at Egypt and Jordan and a lot of these Middle Eastern countries, I know you touched on that with me in a previous call, so we can actually see them as the start of this, as well as we've already seen Greece, many others. So the central banks going on around the world, are they basically in the same boat? These governments?
Yeah, to a degree. What's going on right now is you're first in Tunisia and Egypt and in Jordan, you're seeing the Chinese dismember OPEC. OPEC was a creation of Bush and Rockefeller to control the price of oil, a cartel. And so they set up their little despots to do their dirty work in OPEC and to keep everybody else subservient around the world to get oil. I mean, way back when Hitler was running Germany, the reason the Africa Corps was in Africa was to gain control of the oil fields. By controlling the oil, you control the world. Everybody's known that for almost 100 years. So this has been a long-term strategy of a lot of countries. So we had a cartel created called OPEC. It was our invention, American invention, even though everybody thinks it was Mideastern invention. It was not. And so OPEC has controlled the amount of oil going out and the price we pay per barrel. And now you're watching, in front of God and everybody, the dismemberment of OPEC by the Chinese. Now, the situation in Greece is a little bit different. The Greeks knew something that Americans never figured out, and that was that Rockefeller had hijacked the Greek banks. And what made the Greeks mad is that Rockefeller had gutted the Greek banks, and so they proceeded to burn all the banks that were owned by Rockefeller companies and their credit reporting agencies. And that's what all the violence in Greece was about, because it upset their entire economy, and that also put pressure on the European Union. And so the French are trying to assuage a lot of this discontent. There's been rumor about Portugal going down and Spain going down and Italy going down and Austria going down. And really those, even though they're in financial difficulties, I don't see them going down. But the evidence of what's going on, what you're seeing happening is, for lack of a better term, the good guys in the world are dismembering the cabals of the world that have been the ruling elite that have kept the whole world under their thumb. And you're watching this happen up close and personal in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Jordan. And it's going to spread. We're not done yet. And don't be surprised if the American people find out how their government has been abusing them. Don't be surprised to see the same thing happening here in Washington. When people realize how this has been, the game has been rigged, there's going to be a lot of angry people.
Well, and it's probably good that, maybe you want to touch on that and maybe kind of get some history as far as the way that you have understood it. Because I know that, just having a conversation with you about a lot of this stuff, it seems so unbelievable. The history books that we've been used to, there's probably some validity in some of that stuff, but just like you were talking about the Chinese and, and so forth. So maybe if you kind of went in towards that conversation, gave, the history a little bit different of a history twist, I guess to say the truth on some of this.
Sure. Okay. Well, let me start with a few premises. Okay. I have to go back to when I was in the 5th grade. I had a 5th grade teacher explain to me the reason for education is not to go out there and regurgitate facts and figures and talk back to the teacher and tell the teacher what you want to be heard. The reason for education It's like doing calisthenics, being in training to go out and play a sport, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, whatever. So education is the training field to get the mind to learn how to think. We use education now as a process of indoctrination. We're not training the mind how to think. There is no critical thinking going on in our society. What there is a lot of indoctrination. And over the last 50 years, in that indoctrination, we have changed the very meanings of words. We've made the concept of being liberal sound disgusting. And if you go back and you look at the Eisenhower administration, and you look at the things that Eisenhower wanted to do, and he was a Republican, they are no different than now of having a universal health care, having a safety net for people in this country, and people talk about these issues as if they're liberal. They're not. The only reason a government should exist is to do collectively what we cannot do individually. Eisenhower understood that. But over the last 50 years, the very concept of being conservative and being liberal have changed right before our very eyes. And in that, we've basically adopted a Pavlovian effect of language. When somebody says the word conspiracy, people automatically think of a crazy, paranoid person. But by making people believe that conspiracy is the outgrowth of craziness and paranoia, then we can hide our actual conspiracies in plain sight. Now that I explained that process and how our education system has evolved into an indoctrination system, now let's talk about what's really been going on. When I was in the United States Army, I was in many countries. One of the last countries I was in Germany. In Germany, I was stationed at a place called Merrell Barracks. You can Google that place. I don't even think Merrell Barracks exists anymore. But Merrell Barracks was actually Süd Caserna, and it was on the south side of the city of Nuremberg in Germany, where the war crime trials were held. At Merrell Barracks, Süd Caserna, that was the headquarters for the SS. It was 4 stories above ground. It was 4 stories below ground. The walls between my room and the next room were 2.5 feet thick of concrete, reinforced concrete, and my door was 1.5 inches thick steel. I could literally take a hand grenade, throw it in the room next door to me, and feel no effects whatsoever in my room. Now, that's the way this thing was built. When Patton came in there with the Third Army, he was trying to clear the SS out of there. He went room to room and lost a lot of men trying to clear that room. He cleared the 4 stories above ground, but left the 4 stories below ground alone. He wouldn't waste any more men, so he sealed up those floors and flooded them. And those floors remained flooded for years. Then in 1974, I was behind our NCO club, and there was a door that went down into those catacombs. I went down there, 3 stories down, and I found bodies, and I found books, and I found diaries, and the things I read were so insane I could not believe it. The dirty little secret that I had in the Army is I grew up in a German-American neighborhood. Now, all my friends, their families spoke German, and if I wanted to understand what they were saying, I had to learn German as a child. So I read and I wrote and I spoke German, and the Army didn't know that. And so I was reading all these things in those catacombs and realized that these people believed, and the Nazis believed, that they would eventually take over the United States. I read that myself. A few weeks after I discovered this, the chaplain on that same base has found 8mm films behind the chapel. Now, the chapel on that base was actually Hitler's war office, and the red carpet that was over the floor covered a gigantic swastika that covered the entire length and width of the floor. And the altar was Hitler's desk made of white marble, and it was covered with a velvet sheet or whatever. And so the chaplain was showing me around, explaining this, and then showed me these 8mm films that he had found. And so at night, we would lock the door of the chapel, and he would play the film, and I would translate what those films were about. You know, most of this stuff was very horrific, and I don't want to repeat it here because it would serve no purpose. The point of this is I saw firsthand the extreme fanaticism of fascism, what we call Nazis. And it was hard for me to believe that at the end of 1945, they suddenly vanished from the face of the earth. So, having seen that kind of fanaticism up close and personal, Americans cannot relate to that. They can't imagine somebody having 100, 200, or 1,000-year plan. We're barely able to keep our focus on a 9-second soundbite. So with that going on, I put that aside. A couple of weeks of this had gone on, and suddenly the Army military intelligence rolled into that base and discovered what we had found, and they cleaned everything out. They took everything, and people that knew what was going on, they suddenly disappeared. Fortunately for me, they didn't know that I spoke German, so nothing was ever said to me. But that stuck in my mind about what we had read there and what I had translated for my buddies and for the chaplain, and it was very unbelievable. And then the next thing that happened from there is a woman I had known that worked for Special Services, which they provided entertainment and things for the soldiers there, insisted I take a tour to Dachau, which I reluctantly did. And when I got to Dachau, that moment was a life-changing moment. Two things that struck me at Dachau is you could still smell the sweet, pungent odor of burnt flesh, and that's overwhelming. The second thing is it shocks you that they could do this, and the village, which was only a kilometer away, could not know that there was people being burned at this place. And so at the end of the war, Patton ordered the Third Army to take every single villager and march them through that camp because the Germans were in complete denial of what was going on there. And it reminds me very much of Americans today. Americans are in complete denial of what their country has done. And so this is going to be hard for some people to grasp, hard for some people to accept. But the reality is our government was hijacked after World War II by Nazis. I'm not talking about people that want to be Nazis or like Nazis. I'm talking about actual Nazis. The structure of the CIA was patterned after Gellen's SS, compartmentalized just that same way. And in 1947, when we had the National Security Act, a lot of things were created, the CIA, NSA, and all these kind of secret agreements that when you work on black projects within the government, you sign away your life and basically give up all your civil rights. And this is all done under the veil of national security. Now, having explained that, the one thing that most people have never heard of is a thing called Project Paperclip. And this was a program after World War II to bring Nazis, what they thought were key Nazis, into our country for their technological expertise. Now, we can account for maybe 3,500 of them, but there were 155,000 of those Nazis on that list. And we don't know where the other 152,000 went. So these are the people, the 152,000 are the ones that infiltrated our intelligence networks. Now, to explain that, there's a book, and you can go find this book. It is called How the Nazis Seized Power. I don't remember the author, but it was originally written as a PhD thesis, and a major German newspaper found out about it. They contacted the doctor who wrote it and then told him to take out the anonymous names, and he used other names for the cities to protect the innocent and all this. And this German newspaper found out about it and asked him to write it with the real names, the real cities in there about how the Nazis gained power. They wanted to reprint the book, reprint his thesis as a book, so the German people could see how this was done. And the same thing that was done in 1922 to 1939 has been done in our country. In order to gain complete control of this country, you have to first gain control of the intelligence community. You have to gain control of the media. You have to gain control of the banking. And you have to gain control of the military-industrial complex. And once you have those four things, you got complete control. Now, in the process of gaining control of the media, you have to have